Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel on gender diversity in STEM. My name's Sam, my pronouns are he, him, and they, them, and I'm really excited to be a moderator today. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose lands we're meeting today, and pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd like to take a moment at this point to, I guess, reflect on the variety of ways that we have knowing, understanding, and molding the environment around us in this country, and I guess just the specialness of the fact that this land has tens of thousands of years of science and engineering happening in different forms. So I think that's really special. And when we're talking about being in the STEM space, taking a moment to think on that is it's definitely worth it. So today's session, we're going to be looking at a variety of different topics around gender diversity and STEM. I'm going to, I guess, try and take us through a little bit of time experience, looking at the experiences of diversity and inclusion in the workspace for our panelists here, and then quiz them a little bit on what they'd like to see happen going forward, and what we can all do to bring about a more diverse and inclusive future. If you have any questions as we go, please do ask them. I will either ask them, put them to the panelists throughout the session, if it sort of fits in the flow of what we're talking about, or we will also have some space at the end to go through audience questions as well then. I would also like to just say, I don't know about all of you, but I know that I've definitely listened to panels and thought that's a really interesting point. I'd like to ask more questions about this, and I'll go and type out the question, and then I'll think, oh no, that's maybe a bit of a stupid question, or they won't want to answer this, or maybe the conversation's moved on or something. I'd encourage you, press enter, press send anyway. Your questions are really valuable. We'd love to be able to hear them. We'd like to be able to put them to the panelists. So do share those questions. So let's kick off by asking our panelists to introduce ourselves. My cats are trying very hard to get in the door. But let's start with introducing ourselves. Francesca, do you want to start us off? Say hello.
Hi, thanks, Sam. So my name is Francesca Maclean. I am I'm the strategy and insights lead for our Victorian part of advisory services in ACUR, which is the global independent engineering firm. I have a PhD in tissue engineering for brain repair, and I've done a lot of work in diversity inclusion, specifically in gender equity, as well as being Arab's Australasian disability leader. I'm currently on parental leave, so you will see a little head of a baby here. She'll probably want to be part of the action soon. So yeah, thanks so much for letting me be part of this even with that.
Thank you. Robin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So hey everyone, I'm Robin Aguilar. So I'm a PhD student in the Department of Genome Sciences at the University of Washington in Seattle. I currently develop a bunch of technologies to study microscopy and imaging with chromosomes and a number of different biological phenomena. I'm also a community organizer, so I've co-founded the Genome Sciences Association for the Inclusion of Marginalized Students. I'm also an artist and a writer, and I have tons of different hobbies outside of science, so feel free to ask about work-life balance and some of my own experiences. But thank you, I'm super excited to be here.
Right, Saron?
Thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. My name is Saron Borjano. I'm an engineer and microbiologist by training. Basically finished my undergraduate degree with first-class honours and decided to commercialise the research that I had developed at university. I basically realised that there was no commercial solution to the problem that my technology solved, and kind of went on a bit of a stumble of a journey and thought, hey, why not pursue this pathway and see where this takes me? 4 years later, I, with my team, was able to deploy our technology to farms across Australia with partnerships with organisations internationally, as well as securing a number of Australian and New South Wales federal government grants. That has been an incredible journey, and I decided to step away from that role in April of this year. And at the moment, I'm working with, I guess, innovation-led engineering organisations, and essentially helping them to spin out deep technology from within. really passionate about STEM, gender diversity in STEM, and yeah, really thankful and excited to be a part of this panel today.
Thank you. And Lisa?
Hi, my name's Lisa Kewley. I'm the director of the Astro 3D Centre of Excellence in All Sky Astrophysics in 3 dimensions. I've been doing a lot of work in diversity, both within my Centre of Excellence as well as developing my own forward workforce models, which I'm applying to entire universities as well, including all of the schools and colleges in the ANU. I'm pleased to say that in our Centre of Excellence, we've achieved 48% women now, starting at 20 to 30%, which is standard in the male-dominated field of astrophysics.
Fantastic, and well done. I thought we'd start this off on hopefully a bit of a positive note. Would you be able to share an example from your career of inclusion done right, and what stood out in that situation? What difference did it make to you? So if anyone wants to jump in and share.
I have an example I can share from working at ACUR. It's not gender related, but I think, we know that diversity and inclusion is intersectional as well. Is part of my role as disability leader, I was placing interns with disability within our firm, and typically people with disability have a really low representation in the workforce because there are a lot of barriers presented to education and employment along the way. And so when I was placing an intern in a team of transport planners who really had minimal, knowledge of access and inclusion, before that student actually joined us, we had a session with the team because the team leader asked me to run it on what is disability, what is person first language, what we would call workplace adjustments would this person require. And it was really great to see that proactive approach to acknowledging that we might not know everything about, a particular element of diversity, but we want to learn more, and actually getting everyone sort of equipped to create the best possible work environment for this person. And what I really loved about that instance is that it actually highlighted something that that team does that is probably not great for everyone. When you join the team, you'd have to get up and say, 60 seconds about yourself in front of the team of 30 people you've never met before. That's pretty daunting. And the person who's coming in had a stammer. So that was something that actually made them rethink, well, maybe we should give people an opportunity to prepare something and do it in an environment that they would feel a little bit more comfortable in. And so I guess that's a great example of where when we design inclusive environments for one sort of type of diversity, it then is generally inclusive for everyone as well.
Yeah, I can definitely second that if you design an inclusive environment for one type of diversity, it does become more inclusive for people from other forms of diversity as well. So when we set our goal to achieve 50-50 by the end of 2021, and we started to actually see progress towards the 50-50, we found some really interesting things happening. So, for example, once we'd achieved about 40% women, we received a lot more membership applications from members of the LGBTQIA+ community, as well as members with disabilities. And so overall now our whole centre is more diverse. We also have members of a whole variety of different cultural and religious backgrounds, and in astronomy, coming from different religious backgrounds can sometimes be difficult. And so this is something that we've worked hard on to try to create a supportive and inclusive culture, and it does benefit everybody once you are able to develop that sort of culture, and that you have the support practices and the funding in place to support the requirements and the needs of different members of your community.
If I could share, I would say that one area that I've particularly seen done very well is through this organization called the Society for Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in STEM. It's called SACNAS, and it's essentially a national chapter that provides mentorship, guidance, and support, particularly for folks from those particular backgrounds. So for me, I've definitely benefited it as someone who has shared and intersecting identities with those communities. every time I go to one of those conferences, it's absolutely wonderful to be in such great community with other folks who are also trying to navigate experiences in STEM. And I've kind of had some opportunities to actually serve as a student mentor to help others with graduate school applications and feedback, and helping others kind of work through fellowships and scholarships. And I think where this ends up being a really strong point is being able to have folks who can also provide representation to really help others see themselves in STEM and as scientists. And I think that that's really fundamentally important for a lot of work and inclusion going forward, because I think people in these roles, in these leadership roles, need to be given not only leadership support, but also financial support and mentorship resources. So that way we can also help shape others and help others, so that way they can also see themselves as scientists. And I think for me, being able to see a model like SOCNES is super enriching. And I think that's really helpful for others who are hoping to start leadership in this area.
These are all such great examples. I thought I might share not necessarily a specific, I guess, moment or time when inclusion was done right, but I guess a general sort of shift and change that I've been sort of seeing happen in kind of the deep tech innovation sort of space. And I think it's this idea of sort of blind resumes and sort of removing a lot of the identification and I guess maybe those elements of the application process which maybe bias different applicants. And I think being able to take people, I guess, get an understanding of a person's ability and their qualities and skills without all of the labels and identity attachments really early on in the application process, I think is a great thing, because we're starting to see a lot more diverse teams within the tech and innovation space. And I think a lot of that needs to sort of be done at the beginning of the journey of actually bringing people into spaces and environments where there isn't as much diverse in, I guess, representation. So yeah, just thought I might share that example as kind of a general shift and a change that's happening.
Yeah, I love that. I love how we're approaching this in a very sort of holistic and intersectional way, because everybody does just live at the intersections of so many different identities. I'm really interested in finding out, I guess, if you'd have any suggestions or advice for anyone who's thinking about gender diversity in STEM, but then also wanting to approach it in that really holistic and intersectional way. It sounds like you all have lots of experience just thinking about it in that way, but we know that that's not always the case. So for people who might be wanting to expand their own horizons or be able to support other people or their organizations to do that, do you have any thoughts, examples, suggestions in that space?
So I recommend using, if you're trying to convince an organization to make some change or modifications to activities or new initiatives, I found it really helps to provide literature and data. If you can show people figures on their statistics, then how well they compare with other areas, how well they compare with other departments or other universities or other organizations in the same discipline, that helps. And then that's what led me to do my diversity modeling, because it's actually data driven. It's all data driven, and it's really hard to argue with data. And I find that helps a lot in convincing people to actually make some real concrete actions for change.
And I think importantly, understanding whether your systems can even give you the data to paint an intersectional picture of, what's going on. I think that's a challenge that a lot of organizations have. But I think with, pairing data and stories is really important. But I think the key thing is actually making sure you're getting the right voices in the room. So, as a white woman, it's not necessarily my place to advocate on behalf of, say, women of color or women with disabilities of color. It is really my place to amplify those voices and to break down any barriers that I can sort of use my privilege to do so. So I think it's really, towing that line of not sort of speaking on behalf of people when we're talking about an intersectional approach.
I think another thing that's like incredibly helpful is to understand that as researchers, acknowledging where our expertise lies. Like typically a lot of people, at least around me in my graduate program, where they're mostly familiar with science, just like doing work, doing the experiments. But when it comes to talking about many issues related to gender diversity and also just different levels of intersectionality among identities that people have, it's really important that if folks want to make some type of tangible change in those areas, in order to actually do the work meaningful justice, it's really important to collaborate with people who are experts in those fields of study. And I think that's, not only does that minimize harm, but I think that actually brings greater cohesion to folks in science, because I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are individuals who have done years of training and work in many of these different areas. And I think we can actually strengthen a lot of the work that we do simply by just understanding and also just helping us understand our own work and in the context that we do it historically. Because depending on where you are in the world, like we each have different, our histories are different. And I think that it's important for us in the context that we are, at least in my institution, to do that work and to be able to have individuals from those backgrounds to also do a lot of that collaborative work together. The other thing is that as a student or as a trainee, I think it's also really important to take steps back and take care of yourself first. I know that sometimes this can be very, very challenging work, and you're also trying to balance your studies and many other aspects of your life. So I think one thing that's super important is to also definitely take care of yourself and definitely take care of your needs when you're surveying environments that you're in, or if you see areas of improvement that you would like to make a contribution to.
I agree with a lot of these points. I feel like visibility, education, and actually looking at the data and science that supports and shows that gender diverse teams or diverse teams in general perform really well is really important. And of course, involving the experts who are deeply knowledgeable about these areas. I think also making it clear and known how important it is to have people that are championing those marginalized voices within the teams is so important. I think that as somebody who's been in that situation many times, I think constantly having to be your own champion and speak up for yourself can also be quite tiring. And so having people in the room or in certain environments that can, I guess, support you and be that champion for you is really important. And I guess education about the need for people who maybe don't necessarily come from a marginalized background, but at least acknowledging that there are people with voices that aren't necessarily being heard and playing a supporting role is super important.
Yeah, just to pick up on that idea of championing and what Francesca was talking about like being allies for each other as well. What are some, I guess, examples or stories of times when people have been really good allies for you? Or also, feel free to take a moment to brag about, when times that you've been able to be a good ally for other people too. Just what does that look like to you?
I can start. So to me, like as a young woman in STEM, like what great allyship has been for me is when I get like the old middle-aged white men actually calling out some inappropriate behavior. And I've had people do that when I was in a position where because of the power dynamics with the client, I couldn't actually call out, what was pretty sexist behavior. But there were two other men in the room, and the most senior one actually said, no, that's inappropriate. That's not actually, what we're here to do today. And that, to me, that just blew my mind. I remember at the time, because I was doing like that, the invisible maths in my head being like, all right, if I call it out now, how much is that going to affect my career? Can this project afford to do that? Are we almost finished? No. And we want to get another $1 million variation, so it's just not going to happen. And that's really hard to always have to do that every day at work, to do that maths of is it worth it for me to call this out? How much can I sort of take or compromise my values for, and it's just great when other people do that on behalf of you. And so I then always make sure that if you know, I see or hear things that are inappropriate, and it might not personally affect me, but it still does, you know, go against my values of inclusion and fairness, I'm going to be calling that out so other people don't have to, because it's a huge mental load. And it's sort of what ends up being what we call death by 1,000 cuts. In if you're always that person having to take these microaggressions or call them out, it's exhausting. So I think if we can do that for each other, that's a really great form of allyship for me.
Probably had, yeah, very similar experiences. It's usually had, you know, it usually has been an older white male in a situation or a room where I've maybe not felt comfortable enough to call out either a microaggression or something, or like I guess a comment that someone has sort of made that's made me feel uncomfortable. And also other women who are maybe in a position to call out that behavior. And I think in many of those instances, I've just been so grateful that there has been someone there that has seen that and acknowledged that, and I guess in some ways has validated maybe what I was feeling or had maybe felt that I needed to suppress because it wasn't appropriate, or as Francesca mentioned, you know, you're maybe needing this client for XYZ purposes, and maybe it actually isn't worth the energy and potential losses in the future to call that out. So yeah, I think definitely having people who acknowledge and can see and also validate the times when you maybe don't feel like you can call that out are really amazing, and yeah, have been a big, I guess, supporter for me over the years.
I can share a time where actually it's like my advisors were incredible advocates for me when I wasn't around, and I actually didn't even realize that the situation was happening, but I was basically being misgendered by a couple folks in the hallway essentially. And I wasn't around to be there or to say, hey, you know, these are my pronouns. But one of my friends was like overhearing this conversation in the hallway, and she said, oh, like your advisor literally corrected your pronouns in front of another faculty member when you weren't there. And for me, that was incredibly empowering, because I was like, wow, like my own advisor really sees me, acknowledges me for who I am, and really went above and beyond to just say, hey, no, this is the way it is, and use his privilege to be able to do that. And that is something that I've never really had the chance to like thank him for it, but it's something that I greatly appreciate. And I think it's that in a sense is being a great ally, and that regardless of the situation, even if an individual is not in the room, you're going to be there to be an advocate for them, and also just being a genuine friend. So that was something that I greatly appreciate.
I guess most of the time through my career, I've been the one calling people out. But I do have to say that when I've been on the receiving end of maybe some difficult or troublesome behavior, usually by senior white men, I've had some really excellent mentors, and so I would usually, and they're both men and women mentors, and I would go to them and say, oh, I just received this email, or this person just said this. And when I was younger, I'd be really upset, and they helped me to be able to handle it. So they didn't go around and, you know, address that person themselves. They taught me how to handle those situations. Here's how you respond. You respond really briefly. Thanks for your email, or something like that, something really short. And because you don't want to escalate the situation. And that was really tremendously helpful advice. And also just, you know, letting me know that I hadn't done anything wrong. This is just, you know, this is just what happens sometimes when you start to become competitive in a field. And so I found that really helpful. I think just having mentors was tremendously useful through the years.
Yeah, I think that's
And Sam,
sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Go on, Francesca.
I was just going to say, I guess like what all these examples really highlight is that diversity and inclusion is everyone's issue, like whether you are the target of inappropriate behavior or not, or, you know, structural barriers, it's still, I guess you do have a part to play in this. And I think, yeah, I'd encourage everyone to think about that, because there have been some people who've had awesome experiences and haven't faced, you know, any other challenges that many other people have, and that's awesome, but it doesn't mean that you don't have a role to play in D&I.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think one thing that I've been thinking about as you've been answering is also the changing roles that we can all have. So based on like the different experiences we've got, the different positions we're in, being able to use those different opportunities to be able to show allyship in different ways, whether that's being able to call someone out, or being able to stand up for someone when they're not there, or being able to actually empower that person to stand up for themselves as well. So I think that's fantastic to see all those different examples. So thank you for sharing that. So I guess we've touched on a little bit now. It's not always a bed of roses. Sometimes it can be a little bit challenging. I was wondering if you'd be open to sharing a time when you felt a little bit out of place in your sort of career or your workplace or anything like that, and what you did and what you learned from that.
I totally did. When I was first elected to the Academy of Science, and at my first meeting where I was, being initiated basically into the academy, it was all senior white men, and I was probably the youngest person, and a woman, and I think I stuck out like a sore thumb. What really bothered me about the experience was that the Academy had recently changed their rules so to enable more women to get in, because of the implicit bias that had happened over the years. They'd changed their rules so that nominating committees could nominate 3 people if there was a diversity candidate. And so what that meant was that there was a perception among some of these senior white men, which I heard talking about, as I walked past, it must be the diversity candidate. And so there was this sort of sense that you didn't belong. And I think I was just really lucky that the chair, a woman was chair of that committee at the time, and she said, "You're not the diversity candidate, just so you know." And so she'd done that in advance, I think, expecting that I would probably come away from this meeting thinking that. But that actually affected me for quite a few months afterwards, just the whole, feeling like I didn't really belong there. And it wasn't till a while later I just thought, who cares? I'm just gonna just go with it. And yeah, sure enough, after a couple of years, they were admitting enormous numbers of women. And so then now when I go to the meetings, there's plenty of women, and I don't feel out of place, but I did feel out of place at the time. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that your feelings about these situations can change, and the situation is getting better if you're in a male-dominated environment, or you're feeling like you're in a minority. It can change over time. So just try to keep in mind that how you feel at one point in time may not be how you feel in the future. I think that can help.
I guess, yeah, I was going to talk about, I guess, my general experience being a Black woman with curly hair and somebody who looks really, I guess, different to the, I guess, the image of what the agriculture industry kind of is, or what people sort of imagine, sort of white male farmer in Australia. And I think a lot of those early experiences that I had being like the only female in my startup team, but also in most of the circumstances that I was in, speaking with either farmers or agronomists, it was, I sort of got really comfortable with the idea of speaking to groups of really large farmers and people who really didn't look like me. And I think that initially people would make comments about, the fact that they wouldn't expect someone like me to be out on the farm. And I guess having been, born and raised in Australia, I've got a really Australian accent. And so a lot of the times I'd have conversations with these people over the phone and going out to the farm. I would not, I guess, look like the person that they would imagine I would have been. And I think a lot of those comments were quite, I guess, difficult to stomach at the time. And I think really made me feel like I didn't belong. But I guess over time, as I sort of built up my confidence and was used to being in those environments and spaces, I think, yeah, I guess what I really focused on was trying to connect with them and try to find those similarities between myself and a lot of the people that I was meeting. And I think as well, really being able to talk about the things that I was really passionate about, which was the agricultural technology and ways that the engineering systems that we were building were going to help them, and actually finding that common ground with a lot of these people. And I think ultimately, I think that helped me kind of move past a lot of those uncomfortable feelings, and I really did start to connect and grow and really love the community and be accepted in that way. But I think I'm not sure if that's like a great example of that, but I think it really was about sort of moving past a lot of those little comments and things that people sort of make, and actually just finding that common ground, which helped me a lot.
The example I was going to share was maybe not so relevant because we're in 2021 now, but when we were working in offices, and we've got a beautiful office in Melbourne, it's 400 people. You walk through the front entrance and we have glass meeting rooms. And pretty much every morning I'd walk in from the train station and it was just full of rooms of middle-aged white men. And I remember, just always thinking this means that this isn't for me. Like, if that is the picture that we are putting forward to everyone that walks into this firm, I just had this feeling that I was like, I don't belong here. This is not an organization built for people like me. And that's really hard. And I'm still, I was a couple of years out of my PhD by then, and I was surprised that after, I guess all the maturity I hope I had, I was still able to feel like that. And so then I think about, what did I have in my control? Well, one, I'd see, who was running those meetings, and generally I knew the leaders, and so I'd go and have, give them a mouthful of what I was thinking in terms of the diversity of that decision making on massive infrastructure projects. So I was like, we can't afford to not have women and people of color and young people in those rooms. But then what's even more in my control are the project teams that I put together. And then I make sure I book out those visible rooms as well. So then I do have, really diverse teams of young people doing cool projects. And so that to me is always, if I'm affected by visibility, then it's in my control to make me and my teams visible. So hopefully it paints a different picture for the grads that are walking in the next day.
Yeah, so for me, I would definitely say that my adjustment has still been ongoing in my PhD program. So coming into my PhD program, I'm a first-gen student, also part of the LGBTQIA+ community. I'm gender fluid and also Latin American, and a mixed race Latin American mixed in with Indigenous. And for me, having someone from my background in genome sciences just felt, I immediately felt different at our programs retreat. Like it immediately didn't feel like there was at least that many community with some folks who had my shared identities. There were a lot of older white cis men who were very constantly, dominating conversations about their research, and even in spaces talking about research. And for me in my program, I was thinking, this is really, really hard to be here and not have too many community members who share backgrounds. And it kind of felt hard being someone who didn't maybe have family members in the academy or who had also studied science before. So finding role models early on was really, really difficult. I would say that ended up being a huge reason as to why I started my student group with other students, the Genome Sciences Association for the Inclusion of Marginalized Students. So what we ended up doing was we wanted to make this student group in an attempt to just make community that didn't exist at the time when I was just starting my grad program. And ever since, we've actually grown pretty big. We've been awarded grants to do community seminars, just have socials, have meet and greets, hangouts, mentorship projects with first years, and collaborations with other groups on campus. And I think that has been incredibly grounding and incredibly reaffirming to be able to build and also find that community, and also see other students in other programs who are like, oh man, I'm so happy that this resource exists, or I'm really glad that I have the chance to learn from people and actually make that cohesive community. And I think that has been really tremendous for not only just giving us important space, but for also just helping us leverage our voices and see what we would like to see in our futures, and maybe get connections to how we can get there and fulfill not only our personal but professional goals too.
Fantastic. Thank you. I really love how, and I respect how you're able to talk about your journeys and your stories, and the fact that there is difficulty, but also the hope that you're communicating, and the fact that there are things that we can all be doing. I'd just like to take a moment to encourage any of our participants, if you've got any questions stemming from anything that we've talked about so far, or even things that you found interesting in the conference booklets and our bios and things, please feel free to submit some questions, and we'll definitely get to them in the next little bit. My next question for everyone: what does a STEM field that's fully inclusive of all genders look like to you, and what needs to happen for that to occur? Good question, I know. I'm sure you're all up to it.
So for me, I'd like STEM to look like the general population. I just think that's what we should be doing. We should be having the same amount of members of all different minority groups as we see in our Australian general population, including Indigenous people, including people from all sorts of different cultural and religious backgrounds, and members of the LGBTQIA+ community feeling welcome to come be out and be supported in the community as well, and men and women and other genders just like we have in the normal population.
I think one thing that I would love to see is just folks who have been from historically excluded backgrounds be given leadership roles in STEM. Like fundamentally leadership roles that support them, have folks support them, support their work and their research. But not only that, but being able to have programs that build community that actually caters to the needs of a community and supports and amplifies communities rather than takes voices away or speaking over people who have different needs. Like, for example, one thing that I'm thinking of immediately is just like folks with disabilities in STEM. Like, it's incredibly hard to have access to closed captioning in different areas and needs. And I think it would be incredible to see workplaces that support that support people for their own needs. And also, I think one thing that's really difficult that I've been seeing is that in academia, at least, it's very difficult for folks who have historically excluded backgrounds in STEM not only have to compete for tenure, but to also be in charge of diversity and inclusion programs at their institutions. They're often seen as like not only scientists, but also supposed to be putting on many different hats and many different jobs. And I think it's just such an impossible and unfair task for people to have that expectation of receiving tenure while doing all of these other tasks. And I wish that that would be acknowledged, and real experts who have a lot of this knowledge to lead these projects can also help support STEM curriculum and education to make it more holistic, so that burden doesn't fall specifically on people who have marginalized identities.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think visibility and having other people be aware of the burden and the extra hats that people from diverse or marginalized communities wear. I think we all sort of feel the need to continue to champion people within our own respective communities. And I think when you're then also having to champion yourself and progress your career and your research, I think it can be a lot to take on. So I think, greater acknowledgement and an understanding of that. I think visibility is really important, as Robin mentioned, being able to see more diverse and marginalized individuals in positions of leadership is so important, especially for the younger generation, to be able to see that that is possible and know that they can do that is really important, and something that I want to see more of.
And for me, I've always talked about, what does success look like? It's when people aren't amazed that you're an engineer and you also happen to be a woman, like that. That's the simplest way I can put it. But what does this mean that we have to do, and what does it end up look like? Like, I think we need a whole complete redesign of our systems and our culture, right? So if you think about, and it is challenging with engineering. We're moving to the fact that engineers have to be registered, and so you do generally have to complete a particular level of training, but it would mean that we are accepting people from different backgrounds, whether they've been to TAFE or university, or whether they come from regional or metro areas, and we're actually I guess redefining what we think as talent and as worthy of being in our field, and then that would mean that we can actually enable this diversity. It then means that we don't have D&I committees that are funded by volunteer time. They're actually taken out of your HR areas and put into the business and sit alongside the business as a strategic priority. I think and that's a shift that is a little bit too far from the status quo at the moment, but that's what it's going to take. And I think that's what we see is we are getting gains in other areas, but I think, what we've seen from the Workplace Gender Equality Agency reporting in recent years is that we're actually taking a step backwards. But look at how we have been able to revolutionize work and study, not perfectly, but in a pandemic, right? We had to do this, whereas people with disability have been requesting flexible work arrangements for years and being denied. So it sort of is like, what is going to be that catalyst, that sort of point of no return for us to actually be creative and redesign how we do things, so then we do end up with the field that we want to be in terms of being representative of our whole community and not just parts of it.
So much insight and so many answers. We do have a question coming from the audience, which I think is quite relevant to what we've been talking about. We're just sort of zooming into that school and university space. It's a question very close to my heart as someone who works in engineering education. How do we encourage diverse populations to take up STEM at the school and university level, so before the workplace? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we have to show that we're changing and that we're building an environment that that people want to come and work in. I mean, that's really the fact, is that people have a lot of choice, and there's more choice now than there used to be in terms of careers. People can change careers. Many people change careers during their life. And so the fact that people have options mean that if we don't create a welcoming and supportive culture that people feel that they want to work in, then they're not going to come. And so I actually think we have to get our house in order. We've got to work on that, or they won't come. What we found in my Centre of Excellence, we've got 270 people in the centre, and once we'd hit about 40% women, suddenly we got an enormous number of applications from female students, and it doubled in a year. So we went from 20 to 40 students, female students, and it was completely unexpected. I thought we were going to have to offer female-only scholarships in order to bring up the numbers of female students, but there was a tipping point, and what it was is that you got to have, to attract female students, you need female leaders. And so we had 50-50 female, male leads or co-leads of all of our teams. And it's the teams that were female-led were attracting more female students. And it was exactly opposite. So the female-led teams had this many female students, the male-led teams had this many, and 50%'s in the middle. And so the importance of leadership and having a diverse range of leaders can't be understated. If you want to encourage people to take up STEM at school and university level, you've got to have diverse leaders. Otherwise, you're not going to attract diverse students.
Mm-hmm. And I think also, what we need to do is stop telling people that they can't do it or that they don't belong. So similar to what Lisa's saying in terms of getting a house in order, we actually need to look at how, and when I say we, it is that, broader society, families and communities. We need to stop being surprised when you see a woman engineer. And so I think that's a big thing. Instead of putting the onus on whoever is minoritized or marginalized, we actually need to look at, well, what messages are we sending? And then I think we also need to enable pathways. So I actually don't think it's enough just to get them studying STEM, you know, at school or at university. Because we see a lot of, like when I started engineering as an undergrad, there were 13% women and only 40% of us graduated over 4 or 5 years. So that's just not good enough. So even if you do end up having 20, 30%, we actually need these people to finish and stay in our fields. And so I think what would be great is that if you're enrolled in, you know, maths or physics or chemistry in year 11, you then knew what degree that would enable you to do. You had the financial support, because that's a hygiene factor. I don't necessarily believe in the sustainability of female-only scholarships because they aren't often matched with opportunities for jobs. But if they were, if you knew when you enrolled at high school, you then had, you know, access to this scholarship to help you afford to study and live, but that scholarship also gave you professional development opportunities, which then broke down the next barrier in terms of actually getting a grad job in what are highly competitive and often very masculine, not only recruiting processes, but then work environments. So I think actually having that long-term impact, and if someone had said to me when I was 16, hey, you know, we're going to enable you to do this cool study that can use all of your strengths, and we need people like you, and this is the cool job that you're going to end up with, that I probably wouldn't have done a PhD. I only did a PhD because I didn't want to wear a hard hat. Doesn't work with my hair. So, you know, people need to understand where this is going to lead to, I guess, instead of just studying it for the sake of it.
Francesca, I really liked what you said, because like I think one thing that people commonly look over is that recruitment is not the same as retention. And I think that that is something that is genuinely, like, that's going to have to be an entirely revamped system, because one thing that I'm thinking about is if we can support students at every stage of their needs, whether that's looking for community, looking for mentors, and realizing like, yeah, they can go through their classes and education, finding support, whether that's financially or for other circumstances, if that's related to housing, healthcare. I think that caring for students and caring for their needs is incredibly important for also just building a greater STEM community that supports people who may come in and who may not have the same backgrounds or privilege or opportunities as someone who maybe say has a faculty member or as a family member. I think it's very, very important to acknowledge and address the needs of diverse students and students from different backgrounds, so that way they can come into STEM and feel like they can be authentic and feel recognized for their incredible work that they're contributing. One thing that I think about is thinking about workshops and professional development opportunities. And I think it would be incredible to have opportunities for fellowships and scholarships specifically for students, so that way they can potentially travel or tune in and actually have access to resources and connect with mentors who could also be in different parts of the world. I know that some folks connect on Twitter for other communities, and I wish that this was something that maybe others at different levels of institutions could offer more, like networks of students or trainees who may be in other places, but building greater cohesion and community to show that there are more opportunities also beyond STEM as well.
I completely agree, Robin. Yeah, that's such a great point. Being able to connect individuals and communities to at least these opportunities, but also other people who are maybe in, you know, similar circumstances, or you know, can provide them with that support and knowledge and understanding is so important. I think as well, yeah, the messaging from the community, from family, from teachers at such an early age is such an important thing. I think I was really fortunate to have that I guess guidance and support from my family and community, but I often think of maybe the teachers or the circumstances and the environments that I was in. For example, going to an all-girls school and it being such a novelty that there were girls who were, you know, working at such a high, or doing maths at such a high level, whereas you hear of similar circumstances at all boys schools, or circumstances where there are, yeah, I guess more boys in a school, and that being sort of the norm. And I think then kind of always feeling like what you were doing was really different and maybe not the traditional pathway can maybe deter a lot of people from continuing to do something like that. But I guess along the way, I have sort of felt quite fortunate that I have had really strong female role models, whether it's, you know, researchers or postdocs or professors who I've sort of really looked up to and have had and provided me with that guidance, I think is really important. But I think having more of that, having more women in leadership roles to provide that support and guidance, but also, as Francesca mentioned, getting an understanding of what does that pathway look like. How do you know that if you pursue a certain degree or a course or follow that passion that you have, that there is something lined up for you at the end, and you know that you'll be entering a work environment that you'll feel proud to be a part of and also feel like you belong, is really important. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing all that. I do notice that we've only got a few minutes left, so I thought we'd do a quick round last question. What's one thing that you wish you knew as an undergraduate student? Just thinking about the fact that most of our audience here will be undergraduate. What's one thing that you would know, or one piece of advice you'd give an undergraduate student?
I think for me, I wish I had known that it was okay to have so many different passions and interest areas. I think for such a long time, I felt like I was kind of an outlier or a bit of a different person for not wanting to specialize or not feeling like I knew what I wanted to do at such an early age. And I really envied other people who knew what that pathway looked like for them. And I sort of just pursued a lot of those interests and followed my curiosity. And I think in hindsight now, all of those experiences and things that I did that maybe felt really random and disjointed at the time have kind of all perfectly aligned and provided me with the, I guess, the foundation and the groundwork to you know, do the things that I do. And I think I've just sort of embraced that side of myself and the fact that it is okay to have lots of passions and to follow those things. And you don't have to figure it, or you don't have to have it all figured out at the time, because things will work themselves out.
I think I'm going to pick up on that as well, because I also felt like I couldn't have a range of interests and that I needed to focus. But I am an artist in my spare time and now, but I actually stopped doing art sometime during my undergrad and then never picked it up again until about 5 years ago. And I actually wish I'd continued it all along. I mean, I felt like I couldn't do that alongside, you know, an academic career, that I had to just be this narrowly focused. And, you know, once I had my kids, it was, you know, it was always a bit of a juggling act. And so I wish I knew that you can do hobbies and you can have work-life balance, and you have to work at it, and you've got to be strict about it so that, you know, you don't work all the time, and that it's okay and that you're just as productive if you don't work all the time. If I'd known that, it would have really helped.
My piece of advice would be to go in eyes wide open. So, you know, the students attending today are obviously very switched on about gender equity and STEM and diversity and inclusion, but I think our systems aren't perfect, and they're not where they need to be. But I think if you understand how and why that is, it means that you're less likely to adapt to a system. You know, I didn't learn about this stuff until partway through my PhD, and that was when I started to have to unlearn a lot of I guess, behaviors and ways of thinking, because I'd been conditioned by a culture that I was in for about 6 or 7 years, being in engineering at university. And I think after that, that's when I really started to push back on systems. And it kind of speaks to what the others were saying around, you know, being, I guess, you know, being different, and that's okay. So I think if you understand how a system might not be designed for you just yet, it means that you can sort of safeguard and protect, you know, yourself and be true to who you are, whilst also trying to, you know, smash the patriarchy and break all those barriers as well. And looking after yourself, as Robin said.
I would say one thing I would recommend is super funny. There's like this theme with art here. So when I was an undergrad, I almost did a double major in biochemistry and art. It was very, very hard though, because studio hours and biochemistry lab hours do not mix. It's very, very difficult. I ended up sticking to biochem, and at first, for a long time, I was super, super sad. I was like, man, I like really could have gotten a degree in art. That would have been awesome. But I never stopped. That was one thing. And I think if you are passionate about different areas, my one piece of advice would be see where it takes you. Keep an open mind, be open-minded about that. And even if you consider it a hobby or something you do on the side, I have no doubt in my mind that it will probably come back with you, because today in my PhD thesis, I'm actually working on imaging, which involves doing art, working with creativity, and doing science. So don't give up. You can totally bring a lot of your passions together. And that is probably my piece of advice and where I'd go with it.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for being so willing to share, bringing your insights, bringing your experience with us. I've learned a lot. I've got a lot to think about, and I'm sure everybody who's in our audience has as well. I think the main things that I've got to think about coming from here is just not putting yourself in a box, knowing that you can be so much, you can cross all those different lines of discipline around identities, etc. I've been really encouraged by how you've been able to talk about the fact that support is out there. That sometimes it is difficult to get it, and it does take effort, but it's out there. If you look for it, you find the right people. And I guess encouraged by the message that all of our actions matter in this space. We've got opportunities to be allies. We've got opportunities to be advocates every day as well. So thank you very much for sharing all of that. And thank you everybody who's in the audience. Thank you for participating, and anybody listening to this recording as well, who is who's listening after the fact. Thank you for listening in. I believe that brings us to the end of our session. So thank you.